The rain was relentless that afternoon, hammering against the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows of the evergreen Memorial Chapel in downtown Seattle. Drops traced jagged paths down the glass, blurring the view of grey city streets and dripping, wind-twisted evergreens. Inside, the air was heavy with the thick, almost suffocating scent of lilies and overpriced cologne. My family had gathered in all their finery, encircling my mother's casket beneath the crystal chandeliers. Everything sparkled, except for any real warmth. If my mom could see all this, she would have rolled her eyes at the drama. She never cared for displays, least of all the kind that made suffering look like theatre. She would have much preferred a backyard send-off, with home-cooked food, neighbors dropping by, and everyone wearing their favorite jeans. But my father, ever the image keeper, insisted on the most expensive funeral home in Seattle, somewhere on Capitol Hill, where the carpet was thick enough to drown your footsteps, and the light fixtures looked like they'd been shipped in from Versailles. I stood in the back, close to the exit, feeling entirely out of place. My black dress was simple, cotton, sleeveless, falling just past my knees. Not a hint of lace or shimmer, nothing that would catch a stranger's eye. My only jewelry was a thin gold band that once belonged to my mother, now cool against my nervous fingers. Around me, cousins and aunts whispered behind manicured hands, their voices hissing and soft. Their clothing was another world: Givenchy, Oscar de la Renta, Louis Vuitton. I could almost smell the department store fragrance wafting through the air between bouquets. That's when my sister swept in, Eli, short for Elizabeth, but nobody called her that since high school. She glided over with her signature walk, long blonde hair falling in loose waves over a black Chanel suit, a silk scarf perfectly knotted at her throat, and a Gucci Marmorn bag slung casually over her shoulder. She looked like she'd stepped off the cover of Vogue, right down to her perfectly painted nails, a color somewhere between wine and blood. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, but her tone as sharp as ever. "Jane, seriously?" She made a vague gesture at my dress with a bejeweled hand. "Could you not have tried a little harder? It's Mom's funeral, not, like, a PTA meeting in Renton." Her eyes scanned me up and down, a familiar flicker of judgment tightening her mouth. For a second, I thought she'd hug me, but instead she just fixed a stray strand of her own hair. "I mean, I get it. You don't care about stuff like this, but there's, like, a standard, you know. You're embarrassing, Dad." She said it quietly, but just loud enough that the nearest aunt, my Aunt Carol, who'd never missed a chance to comment on my appearance, gave a sympathetic little sigh. I smoothed my skirt, forcing myself to meet Eli's eyes. "I'm fine, thanks." I knew better than to argue. With Eli, resistance was like yelling into the wind. She glanced toward the casket, then back at me. "Aunt Carol actually asked if you needed money for proper clothes. I told her you're just, or going through a phase." She said it like she was being generous. What nobody knew, what nobody ever cared to ask, was that the dress I wore wasn't some bargain bin purchase from a thrift shop. It was something I designed and made myself, from hand-woven silk that I'd sourced from a small family mill outside of Portland. Its value, even in raw materials, easily matched anything Eli wore. But it was intentionally quiet, a stealth wealth, as they called it in the design world. Eli, however, saw only what she wanted: her awkward younger sister, forever out of step with the family, too poor or too clueless to blend in. "Next time, try to borrow something from me, okay?" she said, then turned and walked away, her heels tapping against the marble floor with every step, a sound that echoed even above the hush of the chapel. I stayed put, barely moving, wishing for the 100th time that Mom was here to rescue me with a laugh or a wink. She always told me that I had a way of seeing things other people missed, that my difference was a gift, not a liability. I missed her terribly, not just for her kindness, but for her ability to make any room feel like home. Now, with her gone, even familiar faces felt like strangers. Dad stood at the front, rigid as a statue in his charcoal Brooks Brothers suit, his face a mask of grief. But every few moments, I saw him glance at his phone, hidden in his pocket. I knew what he was doing. Dad's consulting business had been struggling for months, maybe years, but he still clung to appearances as if they were life rafts. Meanwhile, my brother Zach, always the overachiever, stood off to the side, deep in conversation with his wife, Laura. They whispered with the intensity of people planning a coup, though I caught just enough to know they were discussing the will and how things should really be divided. Laura had never worked a day in her life, spending her time at yoga studios and lunching with other ladies who lead in Bellevue. I wondered if she even knew how much milk cost. A part of me wanted to run, to escape out into the rain and never look back. But another part, a stronger, quieter part, decided to stay. I had learned a long time ago how to keep my head down, to let the storm pass over me while I waited for my moment. That moment, I felt, was coming sooner than anyone expected. After the service ended, the sound of polite conversation, stifled, wary, punctuated by little sighs, filled the funeral home's lobby. People with perfectly pressed clothes and practiced expressions drifted over to the buffet table. I was content to hang back, watching the way their hands hovered over the plates, as if picking the righty hors d'oeuvre would prove their place in the world. I'd always been an observer, especially at family gatherings. I spotted my brother Zach leaning against a credencer, talking in low tones to Laura. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, the kind he bragged about buying with his first big bonus from the bank. He glanced my way, and I caught a flash of something, pity, maybe, or just embarrassment. Laura said something, not bothering to lower her voice. Maybe now that your mom's gone, Jane will finally get serious about her life. That little store can't pay the bills forever. She didn't know I was close enough to hear. Or maybe she did. Either way, it stung. Laura had always been the queen of passive-aggressive remarks. She'd never worked outside of volunteering for a few stylish Seattle charities, most of which seemed to be excuses for posting about philanthropy rather than actually doing it. Even at a funeral, she wore Louboutin heels and carried a purse worth more than my car. I kept my head down, letting their words wash over me. They could think what they wanted. For 5 years, I'd played the part of the struggling youngest child, the one with an unglamorous job at a boutique in Pike Place, who lived alone in a studio apartment, who drove a battered old Toyota Corolla with coffee stains on the seat. But behind that simple front, I had built a life that was mine, and mine alone. My immodest apartment, it was actually a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling views of Lake Union, bored through a trust with my initials nowhere in sight. I designed every inch of it, from the open-concept kitchen to the wall of bookshelves that hid my home office, a place where I ran a growing fashion empire few people in my family even knew existed. And the car? Sure, it was a 12-year-old Corolla, but I loved how it let me disappear into Seattle traffic, how no one ever looked twice at me in a grocery store parking lot. Still, at family events, I let the myth continue. If people underestimated me, I could move through the world unbothered, making decisions no one would ever expect. Eli and Zach were their confidence like armor, but I had something subtler, patience, and a plan. As guests finished their canapés and wine, the conversation shifted from condolences to gossip. Aunt Carol approached me, her perfume arriving a full second before she did. "Jane, sweetheart, how are you holding up? I know it's all so difficult with your circumstances." Her tone dripped with well-meaning condescension. "If you ever need help finding a more stable job, my friend's daughter manages a retail team at Nordstrom. Nothing fancy, but steady work. Health benefits." She squeezed my hand as if this was a generous offer. Uncle Tom, tall and gentle but hopelessly out of touch, added, "If you ever need financial help, Jane, don't hesitate to ask. We're family." Every offer felt like a little knife, twisted by kindness. I forced a smile and thanked them, letting them believe whatever made them feel better about themselves. But my mind kept drifting back to Mom, not the fragile, fading version of her we'd lost to cancer, but the fierce, loving woman she'd been when I was young. She'd worked night shifts at a greasy spoon in West Seattle, saving every tip to buy me fabric scraps and sketchbooks. It was Mom who drove me to my first design class, Mom who told me my oddball dreams made sense in a world that often didn't. She'd been gone, really gone, from our lives long before she died, ground down by years of Dad's indifference and my siblings' endless demands. What the rest of the family didn't know was that, in her last months, every one of Mom's medical bills had been paid by a charity that I quietly funded through my own business. No one had ever asked where the money came from. I watched Eli hold court near the casket, telling the story of her big break in modeling for Emerald Avenue, a luxury brand everyone in the room pretended to recognize. Natural, authentic, the new face of their campaign, as she announced loudly enough for the crowd to hear. She left out that her contract was worth less than her last vacation, or that the brand had lost 3 major deals to competitors that year. As I moved through the room, I heard laughter, at my expense. "Did you see Jane's dress today?" Eli said, her voice cutting through the hush. "There's quirky and then there's just not appropriate." Aunt Carol tutted. "That girl needs someone to steer her right. Maybe now she'll finally outgrow this artist phase." I kept arranging sandwiches, keeping my expression neutral. They'd never know I'd paid for the entire reception, including the expensive catering they were now complimenting. It was easier for everyone if I stayed quiet and invisible. Tomorrow, though, I promised myself, things would change. Not for revenge, but for clarity. For the first time, I was ready for them to see who I really was. That night, I drove back to my apartment, the showbox and my family pitted me for, with its modest red brick exterior and old elevator that rattled when it moved. To the world outside, I was just another young woman renting a place in the city, scraping by in an overpriced Seattle neighborhood. But as soon as I closed the door behind me, everything changed. I kicked off my flats and crossed the glossy hardwood floor, the space opening up in a way no one would have guessed. The living room was filled with light even in the rainy dusk, thanks to the massive windows looking over the harbor. To the right, behind a custom bookshelf, a hidden office, a world of sketches, fabric swatches, 2 high-end computers, and a sleek black sewing machine. This was my real life, the one nobody ever asked about or even imagined. The boutique I worked in wasn't just a job, it was the seed of something much larger. When I'd first started there after college, it was a hole-in-the-wall shop that barely made rent, run by a gruff but brilliant woman named Mrs. Porter. She retired 2 years in and left me the business for a song. What no one realized, what my family certainly didn't, was that under my management, the boutique became a living laboratory. It was where I experimented, tested new designs, watched how women shopped, what they touched, what made them feel beautiful. Every time a customer walked out smiling, wearing one of my pieces, I felt like I'd quietly changed the world. Outside of my little shop, I built connections, one relationship at a time. I scoured local markets for artisans, paid fair wages, learned the business from the inside out. I built up a network, not just suppliers and stylists, but social media managers, pattern makers, even an accountant who doubled as my closest confidant. Piece by piece, I built a brand called Harbour Jane, hiding my name in plain sight. It started as a side hustle, then a second income, then a quietly growing sensation among women who hated the noise and flash of mainstream fashion. But while my siblings posted their wins on Instagram and LinkedIn, I did my best work away from the spotlight. My empire was growing, but I kept it invisible to my family, on purpose. I'd learned the hard way that letting them in would only mean judgment, questions, and the inevitable comparison game. It was easier to let them think I was just getting by, still figuring out what I wanted from life. The next morning, a soft grey light seeped through my windows. I got up, brewed coffee from beans I'd picked up at Pike Place, and stood for a moment in the silence, letting myself grieve. Not just for my mother, but for the versions of myself I'd shed along the way, the obedient daughter, the overlooked sister, the so-called disappointment. I let the sadness come and go. I knew I'd need a clear head for what came next. By 8:30, I was downtown, unlocking the glass door to my boutique. I loved the ritual, the quiet before customers arrived, the scent of cedar from the built-in racks, the click of my heels on polished concrete. Some days I worked the register myself. Others, I retreated to the back room to design, answer emails, or review reports from the side businesses my family didn't even know existed. It was a Wednesday, and the shop was busier than usual. Word had gotten out about my new spring collection, and women from all over the city had started coming by for a glimpse, for a fitting, or just a talk. Most of them had no idea I was the designer. They saw me as another friendly face behind the counter, a girl who'd offer them tea and honest advice about what worked for their bodies. A tall woman with a familiar air swept in, sunglasses perched on her head despite the cloudy day. She looked around, wrinkling her nose at the understated displays. It was one of my mother's friends, Mrs. Whittaker, known for her sharp tongue and her habit of reminding everyone she'd spent 2 summers in Paris. "Oh, Jane, dear," she said, "I've heard you work here now. How? You're charming. Still, if you ever want to do something more ambitious, let me know. My nephew's company is hiring assistants. Nothing glamorous, but at least it's a start." I thanked her politely, even as I bit back a smile. Ambitious? If only she knew. Just as I was finishing a window display, my phone buzzed with an alert from the Harbour Jane website. Another bulk order from a boutique in California, my third that week. I forwarded the order to my fulfillment team and took a steadying breath. Every small win built my confidence, but every family interaction reminded me why I kept it all secret. The truth was, I liked the quiet. I liked the steady work, the slow build, the satisfaction of making something real in a world obsessed with appearances. I knew I could never match Eli's flash or Zach's corporate swagger. But in the shadows, I was building something all my own. Still, in the back of my mind, I wondered how long I could keep my 2 worlds apart. The funeral had shifted something. My mother's absence and my family's constant assumptions made me hungry, not for revenge, but for acknowledgement. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for them to see the truth. The days after the funeral slid by in a grey, persistent drizzle, classic Seattle spring. The city seemed to echo my mood, cloudy, watchful, ready to break open but still holding back. I threw myself into work at the boutique, letting the routine ground me. There was always something to do, shipments to unpack, invoices to file, new designs to pin on mannequins. But under the surface, a restless current buzzed inside me. It wasn't grief anymore. It was anticipation. Dad's house, where we gathered after the funeral, was as tired as the family itself. The siding needed paint, and the kitchen smelled faintly of mildew. Dad acted as if everything was fine, pouring coffee into mugs that dated back to my childhood, passing around bakery cookies on chipped plates. He wore his old college sweatshirt over expensive slacks, half clinging to the past, half trying to project the family's former prestige. Eli, of course, had arrived late. She breezed in with a pair of sunglasses on her head despite the gloom, her boyfriend trailing behind, dressed like he'd wandered in from a tech startup. Eli immediately began holding court in the living room, turning the conversation to her latest modeling shoot. She made sure to mention her contract with Emerald Avenue at least 3 times, dropping the brand name like pearls into her stories. They said I was exactly the look they wanted for their spring campaign. Modern but classic, you know. Their creative director said I have a kind of effortless authenticity that just photographs. Aunt Carol and 2 cousins nodded with wide eyes. Eli's stories always landed. She knew how to sell herself, sometimes better than the products she was paid to model. I stayed in the kitchen, arranging platters of sandwiches and fruit, grateful for the chance to avoid the limelight. My hands moved automatically, but my mind raced. The food, of course, was catered. Beautiful little sliders, fruit skewers, macarons in pastels. Everyone complimented Dad on the spread, and he accepted the praise with a weary smile. No one knew I'd footed the bill. Dad simply couldn't afford it, and I wasn't about to let the family's pride take another hit. While I poured coffee for the aunts, I overheard Eli's voice from the next room, slicing through the buzz of conversation. Did anyone see Jane's dress at the funeral? I get that she's into this whole independent vibe, but seriously. You don't have to be rich to dress well. Some things just aren't appropriate for the occasion. Several family members chuckled, and Aunt Carol shook her head in mock sympathy. That girl just needs a little direction, she said. Maybe now she'll see that being an artist isn't a real plan. I set down the coffee pot with a sigh. Sometimes the weight of everyone's expectations and the shallowness of their judgments felt heavier than grief. Still, I stayed silent, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. After dinner, Zach cornered me by the back door. His face was drawn, more serious than usual, and I noticed how he kept checking his phone. "Hey," he said quietly, "are you doing okay?" I nodded, but Zach pressed on. "Listen, I know things have been complicated, and Dad's business isn't what it used to be. If you ever need anything, like a better job or help with bills, I can talk to a guy at the bank. Not glamorous, but it's something." It was the same tone he'd used since we were kids. Older brother, would-be protector, assuming I couldn't make it on my own. I almost told him the truth right then. But instead, I thanked him, kept my mask in place, and watched him drift away to join Laura and Eli near the fireplace. For years, I'd felt like an outsider at these gatherings, a puzzle piece that never fit. But for the first time, that feeling didn't bother me. I'd begun to realize that the distance wasn't a weakness, it was a shield. Back in my apartment that night, I let myself unravel a bit. The rain blurred the city lights outside, and I sat by the window, thinking about my mother. She would have laughed at the spectacle of the funeral, at Eli's melodrama and Dad's denial. She always said, "A people will see what they want to see. What matters is what you know about yourself." I opened my laptop, answering emails from buyers and collaborators. Orders kept pouring in: dresses for boutiques in San Francisco, blouses for a shop in Austin, even a rush request from a celebrity stylist in Los Angeles. My brand was no longer a secret in the fashion world, though back in Seattle, my family still thought of me as a glorified shop clerk. I checked in with my accountant, confirmed another payment for Mom's hospital bills, and made a note to top up the charity fund that had covered her care. No one in the family ever asked about the foundation's name on the paperwork, assuming it was some distant relative's kindness. I didn't mind. I'd done what needed to be done, quietly, efficiently, with no fanfare. But that night, for the first time in years, I felt the urge to change things. Maybe it was the absence of my mother's gentle encouragement, or maybe I was simply tired of hiding, tired of shrinking, tired of carrying the family's secrets alone. I promised myself, the next time they underestimated me, I wouldn't simply let it slide. My quiet work was over. The time was coming for them to see me as I truly was. The morning after the family gathering, Seattle was caught in one of those soft, misty rains that never really let up. I left my apartment early, umbrella in hand, blending into the steady flow of office workers and early risers. But I wasn't heading to the boutique that day, not at first. My real destination was the heart of the city, the glass and steel Meridian Center, the kind of building you only notice if you're someone who belongs there. I swiped my keycard at the private entrance, nodded to the security guard, and took the express elevator to the 32nd floor. As the doors opened, a familiar hush enveloped me: pale wood floors, curated art, the hum of productivity. My office, the executive suite of Northlight Group, had floor-to-ceiling views of Elliott Bay. Sunlight broke through clouds, painting gold stripes across my desk, which was stacked high with contracts and fabric samples. MEA, my assistant, was already there. She'd graduated from UW with a double major in economics and Italian, and could run the company single-handedly if I vanished tomorrow. She set down my coffee, piping hot, the way I liked it. "Termination papers are ready for your review, Jane," EMIA said, sliding a leather folder my way. Inside were the documents that would end Eli's modeling contract with Emerald Avenue. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eli's career, her current acclaim to fame, was about to take a sharp detour, and she had no idea I held the pen that could redraw the map. I looked over the legalese, then set the folder down. "Any word from their team?" "They're expecting her at a shoot this afternoon," EMIA said, suppressing a smile. "But our PR contacts will make sure the story stays polite. Creative differences, nothing dramatic." Eli didn't know that Emerald Avenue was just one of 17 brands under the Northlight umbrella. Months ago, when her agent had called about their exciting new opportunity, as she had no idea I'd signed off on it personally, viewing it as a favor. She'd bragged to the family about the campaign, waving around her advance as if it was a lottery win. I let her have her moment, even as I watched the company's financials tick down and her spending spiral up. "Do we have updates on the family's finances?" I asked MEA. She handed me a different report, crisp and color-coded. "Your father's consulting firm is 3 months behind on rent, landlords threatening eviction. Zacks Bank is under federal investigation for loan irregularities. Eli's carrying over $60,000 in credit card debt, most of it spent on travel and luxury goods." I nodded, unsurprised. I'd been quietly tracking these issues for months, not out of malice, but out of a sense of duty. My family's public faces were carefully polished, but underneath, cracks were beginning to show. MEA hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go through with the contract termination?" "It's necessary," EI said. "She needs to understand that the world doesn't revolve around her reflection." At that moment, my phone buzzed, a message from Eli. "On my way to the shoot. This contract is going to change everything. Maybe soon I can help you find a real job. Love you, sis kiss mark." I let out a short laugh. In 3 hours, she'd learn her contract was done, and in another 3, the fashion world's rumor mill would make sure every agency heard about it. But I wasn't trying to be cruel. I simply couldn't let her continue treating everyone, including me, as her supporting cast. By noon, the sky was clearing, the city shining in the aftermath of rain. I walked the 2 blocks to my favorite coffee shop, blending in with downtown's lunchtime crowd. As I waited for my order, I found myself reflecting on the strange mix of sadness and satisfaction I felt. No one sets out to become a secret mogul, especially not a girl who once spent nights sewing dresses by lamplight, hoping someone, anyone, would notice her work. But now, standing on the other side of that invisible curtain, I realized I'd built something stronger than recognition: resilience. My family could say what they wanted, but I knew who I was, and I knew what I'd accomplished. Back in the office, MEA handed me a stack of mail. Among the bills and catalogues was a handwritten envelope, my mother's handwriting. My breath caught. It must have been delayed in the mail, a note sent before her final days. I sat down and opened it, hands trembling. "Jane, I know you feel like nobody notices, but I see you. I always have. I am proud of you, not for your success, but for your courage to stay kind in a world that doesn't always value it. Don't let them make you small. Love, Mom." I sat in silence, the city spread beneath me, tears prickling my eyes. For a moment, the old ache of invisibility returned, but then I remembered, the next part of my story wasn't about hiding. It was about stepping into the light, no matter who was watching. And for the first time, I felt truly ready. By the time I left the office that day, Seattle's sky was streaked with indigo and copper, the clouds finally breaking after days of rain. It should have felt like relief, but I walked home with a heavy heart. I kept thinking about Mom's letter, the gentle strength behind her words, the way she'd always seen through the noise to the truth beneath. I took the long way home, weaving through the buzz of Pike Place Market, past street musicians and vendors packing up for the night. My mind replayed the morning's meeting with MIA, the clinical talk of terminations, debt, and failing businesses. These weren't just abstract numbers. They were my family's secret burdens, the ones no one wanted to admit, not even to themselves. When I got back to my apartment, the red light on my phone was blinking. 6 missed calls, all from Eli, and a few from Dad. 1 from Zach. 2. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat by the window, watching ferries cross the bay as twilight deepened, and listened to their voicemails, one after another, like episodes in a tragic sitcom. First Eli, her voice trembling. "Jane, I don't understand. They just called and said my contract is cancelled. No warning, nothing. What did I do wrong? They won't even tell me. Please, call me back. I don't know what to do." Then Dad, sharper, more urgent. "Jane, I heard something happened with Eli's job. You wouldn't know anything about this, would you? I need you to be honest with me for once. Zach's message was more measured, but the tension crackled underneath. I know things have been rocky, Jane. But this is family. If you know something about what's going on with Eli or Dad's business, you need to tell us. We can't keep being blindsided. I let the phone rest in my lap, the chorus of desperation settling in my chest. For years, my family had built their self-worth on their careers, their image, their ability to keep up. They never looked beneath the surface, at least, not until the surface started to crack. The next morning, as I sipped coffee and scrolled through my business emails, another message from Eli popped up. I'm going to lose my apartment if I don't get another job soon. Do you know anyone who could help? Maybe someone at your little shop? There it was again, my little shop. The last refuge of the family's assumptions. I almost replied with the truth, that the real shop was only the tip of the iceberg. That the designer whose name Eli had dropped to her friends, Harbour Jane, wasn't some mysterious creative, but her own sister. But I typed back, simply, I'll see what I can do. It was easier for Eli to believe I was still small. She wasn't ready to hear anything else. Later that day, Dad called, his tone different now, less pride, more pleading. Jane, I need a favor. The business isn't doing well. I need to cover some expenses, maybe $15,000, just until things stabilize. I know you don't have a lot, but could you get a loan? Maybe ask the boutique owner. He was asking his daughter, who he thought scraped by on retail wages, to take out a loan for him. He didn't realize I'd spent more than that on a single suit for an industry gala last month. Or that the boutique, the apartment, even the block where the shop sat, belonged to me, quietly, through shell companies and silent partners. I took a steadying breath. I don't think I can arrange that kind of money, Dad. Sorry. He paused. I could hear the defeat seep into his words. Right. Of course. We'll figure something out. I hung up, a strange ache settling in my stomach. Part of me wanted to help, to swoop in and fix everything the way I had for Mom, but another part knew they needed to face reality. My family's old way, pride, denial, blaming the world, couldn't continue. Not if any of us were going to heal. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Zach needed a reference for a lawyer. Eli was late on her rent. Dad was on the verge of losing his office space. Each of them turned to me, their family failure, expecting nothing, yet somehow still hoping for a miracle. That's when I knew the time for hiding was over. I couldn't protect them from the truth anymore. I didn't want to. I was tired of pretending, tired of letting them define me with their narrow expectations. So I made a decision. I texted the family group chat, a move so rare it instantly got everyone's attention. I've rented a conference room at the Meridian Center. We need to meet this Saturday. There are some things we need to talk about, face to face. It was time to step out of the shadows and let them finally see the woman I had become. Saturday dawned with a bright, cloudless sky, one of those rare Seattle days when the whole city feels freshly scrubbed and a little unreal. I barely slept the night before. My mind raced with everything I wanted to say and everything I knew my family would struggle to hear. I arrived at the Meridian Center early, long before the others. The building gleamed in the morning sun, all glass and steel, casting sharp reflections on the sidewalks. A security guard let me in and offered a respectful nod. He knew me by name. I took the elevator to the 32nd floor, my heart thudding. I'd reserved Conference Room B, a space usually reserved for board meetings and investor presentations. The room was a masterpiece of modern design, a huge mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, and windows that offered sweeping views over the city and out to the Sound. I stood for a while, looking out at the cranes and ferries and endless motion of Seattle. I'd built so much of my life quietly, piece by piece, under this same sky. Now, with one conversation, everything would change. MEA arrived next, carrying 2 coffee carries and a stack of color-coded folders. "You ready?" Ishi asked, setting down the supplies with her usual quiet efficiency. "As I'll ever be," EI said, managing a smile. MEA wasn't just my assistant, she was my ally. She'd seen every version of me over the past few years, the hopeful designer, the exhausted businesswoman, the daughter balancing grief and ambition. She took a seat beside me and began laying out documents, financials, company charts, photos of the boutique, news clippings from trade magazines. In the center, she placed the morning's edition of the Seattle Business Journal, with a headline about Harbor Jane's upcoming West Coast expansion. I took a few deep breaths, reminding myself why I was doing this. It wasn't for revenge or to prove a point, though I'd be lying if I said the idea of shocking Eli or Zach didn't appeal to me. It was about honesty, about finally living as my full self in front of the people who mattered most, no matter how much they'd misunderstood me. Just before noon, my family trickled in. Dad arrived first, looking older than he had even at the funeral, his shoulders hunched in a suit that fit a little too loosely. He glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable, and sat stiffly at the table, folding his hands. Zach and Laura followed, dressed as if for a job interview, their faces pinched and wary. Zach shot me a questioning look, but I just nodded and gestured to the empty seats. Eli came last, in jeans and a sweater, her usual confidence dulled. She hadn't bothered with makeup, and for the first time I could remember, she looked uncertain. When everyone was seated, the silence stretched. I waited, letting the moment settle, then stood and cleared my throat. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know this is unusual, but there are some things I need to share, things I should have shared a long time ago." Dad tried to interrupt, his voice defensive. "Jane, if this is about money, we know you're doing your best. No one expects you to solve our problems." I shook my head gently. "Actually, it's not about what you expect. It's about what you don't know." MIA dimmed the lights and turned on the wall display. The first slide popped up, Northlight Group, corporate structure. Beneath the logo were the names of 17 brands, including Harbor Jane and Emerald Avenue. Zach leaned forward, squinting. This looks like a real company." I met his gaze. "That's because it is. Current valuation is just under $3 billion. The room went still. Even MAA paused, watching their faces. I clicked through slides, charts, press clippings, company milestones, partnerships. I showed them the boutique downtown, the flagship for my entire operation, and photos of me shaking hands with investors, designers, and celebrities at industry events. Eli spoke first, her voice small. You own Emerald Avenue?" "I own a lot more than that," I said gently. "Harbor Jane, too. Every piece you ever wore in your shoots for them, designed by me. All these years, you called my work a hobby. You laughed at my dress at the funeral. That dress was one of my original designs, custom silk, worth more than your entire Chanel outfit. Dad blinked, then sat back, his hands trembling. Why didn't you ever tell us? I hesitated. Because you never really asked. You were comfortable seeing me a certain way, the struggling youngest daughter. The disappointment. But while you were busy judging, I was building something you couldn't even imagine. Zach shook his head in disbelief, scrolling through his phone. Jane, you're on the cover of Forbes. They called you the Invisible Titan. I almost laughed. None of you noticed. None of you read that issue. We don't really read Forbes, Dad admitted, a little helplessly. The silence was thick, filled with the weight of years of misunderstanding. I turned to the final slide, a photo of the four of us, standing awkwardly around Mom's casket, each of us isolated in our own grief. She knew, I said quietly, looking at the photo. Mom was the only one who ever asked what I actually did. She was the only one who saw me. My siblings looked down, finally seeing me for the first time. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint sound of a ferry horn drifting up from the bay. Dad stared at the glowing display as if it might suddenly make sense, while Zach scrolled feverishly through his phone, looking for confirmation in news stories he'd missed. Eli's hands trembled in her lap, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I know this is a lot to take in. But you needed to know the truth. Not just for me, but for all of us. We can't keep living behind masks and assumptions. Eli finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. So, all those times I joked about your job, about your clothes, you were already this? I nodded, gentler than I felt. Yes, Eli. I didn't need your pity. I needed your respect. The boutique downtown? That's the flagship for all 17 brands. The penthouse you called my showbox apartment? That's my home and my headquarters. And every time you dismissed me as a failure, you were dismissing the woman who built everything you see on that screen. Zach looked up, his composure cracking. Jane, I can't believe this. Why didn't you say anything? 100 answers flashed through my mind, but I settled on the simplest truth. Because I didn't want to be loved, or hated, for my money. I wanted you to see me as I am. But I realize now, I let your judgments define me for too long. Dad cleared his throat, searching for footing. Your mother would be so proud. I wish she could see this. She did, I said softly. She always did. I turned to the next slide. A series of confidential family financial snapshots. Dad's failing business, Zach's legal trouble at the bank, Eli's debts, laid out with clinical precision. It wasn't meant to embarrass, but to cut through denial. I haven't just watched you struggle, I said. I've quietly helped in ways you never saw. I paid off Mom's medical bills through a charity fund. I kept the house from going into foreclosure last year. Dad, you thought that was a miracle loan from the bank? It was me. And Eli, I made sure you had the modeling contract with Emerald Avenue when you needed it, even if you never knew. Eli's voice broke, raw with regret. Jane. I'm sorry. I never thought. I was just angry and scared, and you were always there, but invisible. I don't know how to fix this. Zach looked at the floor, ashamed. I owe you more than I can ever repay. I shook my head. You don't owe me. What I want isn't money, or even gratitude. I want honesty. I want to move forward, together, but not if we have to keep pretending. For the first time in my life, my family listened, really listened. The room felt lighter, as if some ancient weight had finally lifted. Dad finally spoke, voice shaky. What happens now? I looked at each of them, letting the silence build. I can solve your financial problems. All of them, with a single transfer. But I won't go back to being the family's invisible disappointment. That's not who I am, and it's not what Mom would want for any of us. Tears streamed down Eli's face. How do we start over? How do we make this right? You start, Eli said, by seeing me now. The real me, not the girl you made up in your heads. And you start being honest, with yourselves, and with me. Zach nodded, resolute. I want that too. No more lies. No more acting. We can build something new. As a family. MAA turned the lights up, and the meeting ended not with a bang, but with quiet hugs and promises, a feeling of tentative hope in the air. That evening, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but lighter than I'd felt in years. For the first time, I had nothing left to hide. No masks, no secrets, just the simple, and hard one, truth. A few days later, we met again, this time in my home, as equals. We talked through plans. Dad would consult on Northlight's acquisitions. Zach would help manage international banking as soon as his legal situation resolved. And Eli would work on creative direction and outreach, drawing on her consumer's perspective rather than just her image. There was one rule, I insisted. If the boutique downtown stays exactly as it is. I'll still work there, just like always. I need to stay close to what matters. For months later, as Northlight Group went public, we gathered again in the same conference room, this time for a celebration. Dad was re-energized by his new role. Zach had found confidence helping with the company's European expansion. Eli was finally herself, no longer hiding behind borrowed labels or shallow gigs, but doing real creative work. As I stood by the window, looking out over the city, I felt Mom's presence more than ever. She'd always known what really mattered. Not the money, not the titles, but the family we became when we finally saw each other clearly. The day Northlight Group went public, the Meridian Center's top floor buzzed with energy. For the first time, our family was gathered not for crisis, but for celebration. The IPO launch was broadcast on every screen, stock tickers flickering in green and gold. I stood near the windows, sipping coffee, watching my father and siblings chat with investors and staff, each of them so changed from just a few months earlier. Dad had thrown himself into consulting, helping guide Northlight's acquisition of 3 struggling fashion houses, his old-world business instincts finally finding a new stage. Zach's legal issues had been resolved. He'd accepted responsibility, made amends, and now led our international banking team, connecting us to partners in London, Zurich, and Tokyo. Eli, for the first time, seemed truly at peace. She'd become the public face of our brands, not as a model, but as someone who understood what real women wanted from fashion. As the clock neared 9:30, our team gathered by the large video screen. The Nasdaq bell was about to ring. I could feel the excitement thrumming through the floor as the opening price came in, $47 a share. Within hours, Northlight's value had soared to over $4 billion. Journalists buzzed, snapping photos and asking for interviews. But I stepped aside, letting Dad, Zach, and Eli take the spotlight. I didn't need the attention. I'd already won the only battle that mattered. After the press left and the excitement faded, we gathered together in a quiet lounge overlooking the Sound. The city glowed gold beneath a late afternoon sun, ferries threading the water far below. Dad raised his glass. To Jane, who taught us all what real strength looks like. I spent years thinking I needed to protect this family. I never realized you were the one protecting us. Zach grinned. And who proved that sometimes the failure is the real visionary? Eli smiled through tears. I'm proud to be your sister. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you as you are. We toasted, not just to money or success, but to honesty. To seeing each other as we really were, and loving one another anyway. Over the following weeks, the transformation continued. Dad found new joy in mentoring younger executives, sharing both his mistakes and his hard-earned wisdom. Zach stopped measuring himself by bonuses or other people's approval. He started spending real time with his family, cooking on weekends, even volunteering with financial literacy programs. Eli flourished in her new role, no longer trying to impress with borrowed glamour, but leading workshops for young women in the city. She spoke honestly about her struggles with self-worth and her journey from superficiality to substance. The girl who once judged my simple dress now championed the idea that style starts with confidence, not price tags. As for me, I kept my promise. Twice a week, I worked the boutique counter just as before. I still poured coffee for regulars, offered advice to nervous brides, fixed crooked hems in the backroom. My team laughed when customers didn't recognize me from magazine covers, or when they told me you should meet the owner. She's a genius. I just smiled and said I'd pass on the message. Sometimes people asked if I regretted staying hidden for so long. The truth is, the quiet years taught me patience, resilience, and the kind of empathy that comes only from being underestimated. I learned to measure success not in headlines, but in the steady, stubborn pursuit of purpose. One rainy afternoon, as I was closing up the shop, Eli stopped by. She wore jeans, no makeup, and carried a bag of pastries from our favorite bakery. I had a rough day, she admitted. Thought maybe you'd want company. We sat in the back, drinking coffee, talking about everything and nothing. Eventually she said, do you ever miss the way things were before? I shook my head. Not really. I think sometimes you have to lose your old story to find the one that's true. She nodded, her gaze soft. Thanks for not giving up on us, even when we deserved it. I squeezed her hand. That's what family's for. Second chances. And third, if we need them. That night, as I walked home beneath the neon glow of city lights, I thought of Mom, her laugh, her courage, her faith in the power of kindness. I realized that her real legacy wasn't money or even the business, but the stubborn hope that people could change and that families could find each other again, no matter how lost they'd been. Northlight Group became one of the most successful fashion IPOs in years. The headlines called me the quiet billionaire, Seattle's hidden mogul, the invisible titan. But the only title that really mattered to me was a sister and a daughter. The greatest victory, I learned, wasn't outsmarting those who doubted me. It was choosing, every day, to believe in the possibility of forgiveness, of understanding, of coming home. Not to the past, but to each other. And that, I realized as I turned the key in my door, was a kind of success that could never be measured in dollars at all.